Now, we spent weeks talking about the Labour leadership race, but just as it reaches its conclusion, it's been overtaken by the far more important issue of coronavirus. The pandemic is dominating everything, including the final weeks of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party. Mr Corbyn joins us now in the studio. Thank you very much for being on the show today.
You're very welcome.
I want to start off with coronavirus and the health response before we get on to the economics of it. And just to start off with this graph that we've been publishing in the Financial Times, this shows the number of deaths from coronavirus, and it shows that the UK, that kind of grey line there, is tracking at a faster rate than Italy, which has already seen more than 4,000 deaths.
Or Iran as well.
Yeah.
The USA is steeping up a bit, but it's still well below it. Well below the UK.
I mean, given this, do you feel that the government is doing enough?
Well, clearly much more has to be done, and what this exposes is the problems within the NHS, and so I'm glad that there's been an arrangement for private health beds to be now made available for the NHS, but it does indicate just how damaged our NHS has been by the loss of beds over the past 10 years. Clearly the NHS has got to do absolutely everything it can, and I think we should just pause for a moment and thank those NHS staff that are working unbelievably long hours to try and cope with a crisis that obviously is not of their making.
Are you concerned that NHS staff don't all appear to have the protective equipment that they need?
Well, it's that and testing. The rate of testing we're doing in this country is far too low. The World Health Organization have said test, test, test. We have increased the amount of testing, but it's still not enough. Even all NHS staff haven't been tested, never mind all care staff haven't been tested yet. And so how can we accurately know how many cases of coronavirus there actually are? What we do know, sadly, accurately, is the number of deaths from coronavirus at the moment. But we have to be better at testing and provision of protective equipment. NHS staff have not all got full protective equipment at the moment, or protective clothing. Care staff have almost none at all, and care workers, some of whom work in care homes, are obviously at risk. But even more at risk are the care workers that are going from house to house of their clients, and clearly in danger of either contracting or spreading the virus.
You were talking about the state of the NHS. We started off with a position where we had, I think, 5,000 ventilators, around 4,000 intensive care beds. Do you feel that the health service is prepared for a crisis like the one we're seeing?
No, I don't. And I was talking to Matt Rack of the Fire Brigades Union, who was explaining to me that more than a decade ago there was discussion about threats and dangers to our society. And he said the big one was actually an unknown virus sweeping this country, as indeed Spanish flu did after the First World War and so on. We are not prepared for it. We were not prepared for it. And surely this is a message that we have to properly fund our public services, and we have to make sure everybody has access to good health care and reasonable state of living. Otherwise, we're all vulnerable to the vulnerabilities of the poorest and most vulnerable in our society.
The NHS is, of course, one of the front lines against coronavirus, but it feels as if we all are part of the front line as well. The actions that we have to take are part of this battle too.
We are, you're very well put, we are all the front line now, and I do urge people, I really do, listen, listen, listen to the advice you're given. Don't closely associate with people. Don't go places where there's going to be big crowds, and make sure you're not part of a big crowd. I know all this is difficult, and obviously it's a huge culture change. And I have to say, my own community, looking out the windows this morning, the roads are empty, the streets are empty. OK, it was very early, but even so, most of yesterday was like that. But it is a massive culture change. But we've also got to think that when people are told to isolate at home, if you've got a decent place to live and you're OK, that's irritating but not too bad. If you're in a two-bedroom flat with 3 kids or 4 kids and you're stuck there for weeks on end, it's very, very difficult, and the stress and tension that's there is huge. So I think we should also just pay a moment to thank all those volunteers all over the country that came out in the past week. I was with a group on Friday who had been leafleting around my community saying, if you can't get out and you need medicines picking up and things like that, we're here to help you. And so it's the volunteers that are coming. And yesterday in one of the parks, a private gym that's closed for obvious reasons went out in the park, put their equipment out, obviously well-spaced apart, and said, anybody's free to use it. It's that kind of thing. Actually, there is a greater sense of community spirit than I've known for a long time, and that's good.
And it's going to be particularly hard, of course, for the 1.5 million people that we've just heard Robert Jenrick talking about, those most at risk, who are now being effectively ordered to stay at home for up to 12 weeks.
Well, indeed, people that are ordered to stay at home and don't have the wherewithal to survive, unclear about how they're going to pay their rent, and they might have been given some guarantees of no eviction in the immediate future, but it goes on longer than that. But also the very large number of self-employed. I welcome a large part of the economic package the government produced on Friday. It was the result of a lot of pressure from the Labour Party, from trade unions and employers' organisations. Lots of people put pressure on them. But for the self-employed, it is very, very difficult. Now, self-employment covers lots of things. Some self-employed people are quite well off. A lot of self-employed people are not. It's a very marginal existence. And if they're told to stay home and all they can access possibly is benefits through universal credit, they've got to sign up to get it. It won't come straight away. They are vulnerable. Therefore, they've got to put food on the table.
At the
They're
same
going to go
time,
out.
Isn't it right to cut the government a bit of slack here? It's a very fast-moving situation. As you say, self-employment is a whole range of different levels of income and situations. If they need a bit more time to work something out, that's fair enough, isn't it?
Listen, I fully understand the problems of working all this stuff out. We've had meetings with the Prime Minister, we've had meetings with the Chancellor, we've had meetings with a lot of ministers, and we had a meeting of all party leaders on Friday evening as well. Most of these meetings are done by conference calling and so on. I fully understand all the stresses and problems associated with it. Of course I get that. But the danger is here, now and present. If you're a self-employed electrician, you've got to keep your family fed, and you normally bring in 500, 700, £1,000 a week, whatever, you're suddenly told you're going to get nothing and you cannot go out. You've got bills to pay.
At the same
time.
Not
everybody's going to do it. So I'm just saying the government's got to give a message and a signal, which they haven't given, about raising statutory sick pay or about the self-employed. There are millions of people working self-employed now in Britain. We've got an economy that's changed.
The package announced by Rishi Sunak was unprecedented. 80% of people's wages the government is prepared to step in and pay. John McDonnell's reaction, the Shadow Chancellor, was, I think he needs to go a lot further and a lot faster. I mean, some people listening to it might be thinking, goodness me, it just sounds like Labour's moaning.
Well, John also said that he welcomed the direction of the package, he welcomed a lot of it. The point he was making was that some employers, and already there's evidence of this, are not paying the other 20%. So it's a 20% wage cut, or they're laying people off rather than accept the package that the government's given, because clearly the economy needs to be strong for recovery after coronavirus. But I have to say, of course, it's a huge step forward, and the amount of money that has now been found to invest in our economy is great, is huge, and it's what I was condemned for asking for to deal with austerity and poverty in Britain 3 months ago.
Are you talking about the election then?
Yes.
Well, some people would say it's slightly different times since the election.
Of course it's different times, but we just have to recognise as a society 10 years of austerity has left us a bit vulnerable.
So you won the argument, do you think?
I don't want to relive every past debate. All I'm saying is that the principle of caring for everybody in our society is now absolutely centre stage. And so we understand all of our vulnerabilities and our dependence on each other. And saying, I think as a society, we're going to be stronger at the end of this, not weaker.
Talking about being stronger, not weaker at the end. We've been talking a lot about the people who've done good, those in the NHS, those people helping out in their communities to look after the vulnerable. But we've also seen scenes of people still going to the pub last Friday night, people going down to Skegness for a holiday, people stockpiling in the supermarkets. Are you worried that some people are acting selfishly?
There are, unfortunately, aspects of human nature that are appalling. One of them is greed. And so they go into a supermarket, they've got a big balance on their credit card, so they can afford to take all the fish, all the beans, all the bread, everything, far more than they could possibly consume in a month or two. leaving other people with nothing. And so you hear some horrible arguments that have gone on in supermarkets, and you also hear some heroic work done by supermarket managers. I was talking to one last night, a local store to me, and he has run his store extremely well. What he's done is given a time when pensioners and vulnerable people can come in, and so on and so on. And he's looking at, and he's not letting anybody buy more than one item. I think it's fine. I think that's the way it should be. And so I do say to people, there's no need to stockpile. All you're doing is actually making it harder for those that don't have the ready cash that you've got. So just be reasonable and be fair about it. Now, and also to other shops, don't start jacking up your prices. The wholesale prices have not gone up, and there's some profiteering going on, and that has to be addressed.
Now, we're all having to make changes to our lives that a couple of weeks ago we could never have imagined. Sure. You're 70. You're in the higher risk category. What changes are you having to make to your own life?
Well, I'm obviously working, and I'm a local MP as well as leader of the party. I'm making sure I'm not getting too close to people, which is why I didn't even shake your hand this morning, as though it's the normal thing to do. And also making sure that everything's kept absolutely clean. And I think as a whole country, we should say thank you to all the cleaners.
Is it
all
right?
over the country? They're doing a great job.
Should you still be going to Parliament, for example?
Well, that's a difficult one, and we have discussed this with the Speaker and with the authorities, and the compromise we reached last week was, firstly, that I think Parliament should remain in session. It's very important that we have the chance to put questions to the government, and of course this legislation is going to come up on Monday. But what we agreed was, informally between the parties, we'd greatly reduce the number of MPs that came into the chamber. They would have to sit 1 to 2 metres apart, and so Prime Minister's question time last Wednesday was a very strange experience. All the galleries were completely empty, and there were only less than 100 MPs in the whole chamber, all well spaced out. The atmosphere was like something I've never known before. And
but you're going to continue going to Parliament, though?
Yes, of course, because I've got to speak there and I've got to ask the questions there. But again, we've reduced the number of people in my office as low as we possibly can, and they're working from home. And we're all getting very good at Zoom calls and conference calling. OK.
Now, it feels strange almost to talk about your legacy as Labour leader, because coronavirus has dominated everything, it's changed everything. But at the same time, it is one of your first interviews since the election. You come into the end of your tenure as leader. So it feels right to ask a bit about that as well. Do you feel like it was a successful period for the Labour Party?
Well, unfortunately, we didn't win the last election, and that, of course...
The last two elections?
Well, yeah. 2 elections. We came very close in 17, but 19, I get that. Obviously, I'm very sad at that. What I think has happened is the Labour Party has absolutely addressed the issues of economic security and justice in Britain. In the 2015 election, we were promising a lighter form of austerity rather than the complete end to it. What we've done is become a party of economic inclusion, and I'm proud of that. We're also a very much larger membership than there ever was. It's gone up from 200,000 to almost 600,000 whilst I've been leader. And I wrote an email to all party members a week ago saying, please get involved in your local community, please go out and do everything you can to help people. We've got 600,000 people to do that. And I had a big Zoom call on Friday night with lots of members, and they fed back to me what they're doing in their communities. We've become a more community-based organisation, and we've changed the agenda on the economy, changed the agenda on social justice, changed the agenda on the green industrial revolution and environmental sustainability. So there's many things I'm very proud of.
But some will listen to what you've just been saying and think there's not enough admission of what went wrong. I mean, we can have a look here. This is the how Labour have done historically in Labour election results since 1935. You can see that you led the party to the worst defeat in 85 years. You lost 2 elections.
Yeah.
You also became just the second political party after the BNP to be investigated by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. I mean, many people will think that this was not something to be proud of. It was a disastrous period for Labour.
We had unprecedented attacks made against us. I'm proud of the economic agenda we put forward, and I think we've achieved a great deal in changing the agenda on that, and I'm proud about that. Obviously, I'm very disappointed by the election result. In the end, the 2019 election was the Brexit election. I recognise there are passionate feelings for Remain, there are passionate feelings for Leave. I had to bridge that gap amongst party supporters as well as party members, and I did my best to do that by offering the arrangement of a deal with the EU and a second
But it didn't
referendum
work,
deal.
did it?
Clearly, that wasn't something that finally was achieved. But the Prime Minister fought the election campaign saying he'd get Brexit done. He hasn't got a trade deal with the USA. He hasn't got a trade deal with Europe.
Well, to be fair, he's been dealing with a global pandemic that nobody could have predicted.
I absolutely, of course I appreciate that. So everything's going to have to be put on hold because at the moment the whole world has got to deal with this global pandemic, and we've got to recognise that global health inequalities as well as national health inequalities are a danger to all of us. And so, as party leader, I'm proud of our members, proud of the way we've developed greater democracy in the party and some of the more democratic procedures that have been introduced. But clearly there's a long way to go.
You talked there about changing the agenda. Which of the leadership contenders do you think is best placed to continue your legacy?
Listen, they've fought a good campaign. They've had great debates, all of them. And I know them all very well. At various times, they've all been in the shadow cabinet. They've all been appointed by me.
Some resigned and others didn't.
2 resigned and 1 didn't.
So should we conclude that the one who didn't is best placed to continue your legacy?
What you should conclude is that I am determined that our party remains an anti-austerity party, remains dedicated to peace and human rights around the world.
If you're a Labour member trying to work out who the best person is to do that, what would you say to them?
What I would say to them is think through what you want for our party and our society. Think through who's going to carry forward the anti-austerity agenda, but think through also the need for strength and democracy within our party. And I tell you what, I'm going to be very busy doing campaigning work on economy, on human rights and environmental issues. I am not disappearing from anywhere. If
you're not disappearing, is there a particular shadow cabinet role that you've got your eye on?
Well, I've always spent my life trying to deal with issues of human rights and justice around the world, and that is something, whether I have a position or not, is not important. What's important is that we use the honour of holding public office to hold executives to account, but also to hold the unaccountable to account for those that are fighting for their human rights.
Shadow Foreign Secretary?
Are you suggesting something?
Okay. Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much for coming on the programme today. Thank you.